Welcome back as we continue this look at improvised weapons. So far we've been kind of ramping up the scale on the inflexible weapons. So we started off and we had a bit of a look at like baton, we moved up and had a look at cane last week, and this week we're moving up to the two-handed inflexible. So this is anything you pick up that's just a bit unwieldy to use with one hand. I mean, okay, this is actually quite light because it's just a broom handle, but even still, the amount of time it takes me to move leaves me horrendously open if I try and use it like a one-handed weapon. So, obviously, we won't, because that would be dumb. So we're going to use it instead with two hands. And that means we need a different way of using it, because trying to use this as Vignette with two hands isn't going to work. So instead, we're going to go to something a bit more similar to bayonet or spear when we come to look at this. The problem you have with a lot of people who might use this kind of, or who at least anecdotally use these kind of weapons, tends to be things like pull cues and things. And the problem you have is a lot of people think they want to use them like swords and smash into their opponent here, and then you snap it in half. You know, these things don't tend to have, unless they are built for it, a lot of strength in terms of not being shattered. Well, that's not the end of the world, because then what you've got is a one-handed cane, one-handed inflexible. You can potentially even two if you can collect the other one, and you can continue to fight with that. But what's much better is to use the fact that the nature of wood means that the grain running down here makes this very strong along the length of it. And if this was something even like a golf umbrella, again, I've got a relatively long cord down the center. So that's what I actually want to employ. So I'm going to use this much like you would do with a spear or a bayonet, as I said. I'm going to use my offhand, tend to have my offside forward, more as a pivot. It's going to stay largely where it is, and my other hand is going to move that point around. And you can see it doesn't take a lot of movement from my hand here through the pivot to move the front of that around quite a bit. And that's largely what I'm going to use. So I'm going to use either pulling it across to one side or flicking it off to the other side as my two main ways. So from here, I'm either going to knock things that way or knock things that way. And then whenever I get the opportunity, boom, slamming with both hands into the chest or the face. So even if my opponent's armed with something like a cane, baseball bat, whatever it is, something a bit shorter, yeah? I think the chances of two people going at each other with pull cues as if there were spears is unlikely. But even if something's coming in, I have the range advantage and I need to keep using that. Again, the minute I start trying to use this in here, I'm kind of losing that range. Whereas here, if you're trying to swing at me, I'm going to hit you whilst being still clear out of range. Yeah? And that might not be a killing blow, but that is going to, yeah, which can be followed up by something if I want to continue that line. If I'm being less nice, a thrust to the face will be a little bit more fight-ending. Even if they are getting a bit closer and coming in to a point where they can hit me, I can use, sorry, get my timing wrong, I can use that to deflect up. From there, I'm just dropping it back onto point, and I've got that slam in there. Equally, if it's coming in the other side, I'm going to use that semicircle, and then I'm going to ram in with a point, potentially, you know. Just because I'm using a two-handed weapon doesn't mean I instantly forget how to do all of my pugilism and all of my other fighting, my grappling and stuff. So, I might do, it's possible. And equally, I can use higher blocks, so if it's coming in, I can always try and block across here and then drive down into the stomach. Is still going to be fairly crippling. So I'm going to use this, as I said, predominantly around here to keep distance, deal with anything coming in, boom, hit him if I can. Now the problem is, this is a stick, and I'm pointing it directly at him, so there's nothing to stop him just grabbing the stick. And then again, I'm in the situation where now we both have a stick, but he has a second stick, and I'm going to get beaten up. So, there's a few things we need to be aware of. One is, if he tries to grab that cane, I'm going to pull it back and reply. There's a few ways I can do that again. I can use a disengage, I can pull it back, there are options. The other thing I've got to be slightly worried about is if he can smack it, if he smacks it on the, well, he can try and smack it across my body. Yeah, and if I get to here, this gives him the opportunity to close down. So I have to be prepared for having to switch to a shorter style of fighting. So if that gets knocked out of the way and he comes in, I'm going to switch round and use the butt of it straight in. I'm not going to wait for the incoming attack, because he's had to take energy to knock it out. Bang! I can be in there before he gets a chance to actually land the blow. Equally, if it goes the other way, things get a bit more messy, yeah? But I've got the two hands here, I can still bring this up for a decent block, yeah? And I can use the butt of that as well. Equally, if it gets thrown over back to the side we were looking at before, sorry if you were throwing cane across, knocking it away, yeah? I also have that option through here where I can use the butt as well. So I can still be quite versatile in the way that I use this. So I'm predominantly going to keep them at range, but if they do want to close, I'm quite happy to switch that round and use something a bit shorter, predominantly face and across the chin, down solar plexus, to do as much damage and keep them busy. Equally, once I'm comfortable with that, I can start looking at things that I might be able to do. If I go for the face, most people will block, or yeah, but from there, I can then turn, normally take a kneecap off, because I don't need a lot of power to do that. So again, I can get some fairly serious damage in. That's cutting though, I don't really want to do that. If I want to go for the face, I can always just disengage and take a different line of attack, which is equally going to slow my opponent down and potentially give me the chance to run. So there's a few ideas for starting to look at using two-handed Inflexible. We would always advise you take it as a bayonet rather than trying to use it as some kind of long sword or great stick, because generally most things are not built for it. So we'll leave it there for today, and we'll pick things up again next week, and we're going to switch all the way back to the short range again, and we're going to look at the short range flexible in the form of the kosh, or the good old half brick in a sock. And we're going to look at how to actually use that with some level of effectiveness. So until then, have a great week.